Americo Living Trail. 1. Americo Living Trail. 2. Autobiography of an Enlightened One. Author, Americo. My Retreat, the Sign of the Son of Man, Merkaba and the Era of Peace. It began to be transcribed in April 2002, April 23 to May 3. Alignment in conjunction Saturn, Jupiter, and Mercury, Venus. All rights reserved. Mexico 2002. Registration No 03-2003-02-24-1347-1400-01. Reviewed by the author in 2017. The wise seek the light and the mad give it to them. Anonymous. Americo Living Trail. 3. Americo Living Trail. 4. Index 3. Presentation, Our America by Pedro Lopez Solis. 15. Summary of the letter sent to the media regarding the television program Big Brother. 16. Introduction. 18. Prologue. 19. Part 1, Birth and Preparation. Prologue. 22. Birth and Childhood. 23. Contact with the Masters of the Great Universal Brotherhood. 31. Courtship, University and Premonitory Dreams of an Unusual Path. 34. 37th World Headquarters House Studying to be an Astrologer and the Mark of the Chosen One. Death of Master Estrada, and the Oath to Defend the Order of Aquarius. 39. Family Situation. 42. Waiter AT the World Headquarters and Wholemeal Bread Seller. 43. Failed in Yamines. 46. The Half Chagnian Cross. 48. Highs a Special Friend. Small Retreat. 49. My Partner. 50. A Short Courtship. 52. Emerging Sexuality. 53. Living in My Father's Little Workshop and My Friend in Disgrace. 56. Getting to Know My Partner and Her Preparation for a Psychoprophylactic Natural Birth. 58. The Evidence of Becoming a Guru and the Real Story of My Partner. 60. Americo Living Trail. 5. Netzahualcoyotl Institute. 62. Unexpected Confessions of My Partner. 63. My Initiation as an Astrologer. 65. Things of Masters and Gurus. 66. The Gurus and Their Inexplicable Vow of Celibacy. 67. Trying to Enter a Retreat at the ASRHAM of Cotepec, Veracruz. 68. The Gurus Making Their Own Decisions. 69. The Harmonic Alignment of 1988. 70. With the Metaphysicists. 72. The 1985 Earthquake and My Wholemeal Bread Business. 73. Paying Debts to Partner. 76. Emotional Instability and the Desire for Another Partner. Masonic Initiation. 77. My Young Mason Disciple and the Personality of His New Master. 78. The Child's Agony, Heartbreak and Love. 81. The Secretary of Home World Headquarters. 83. The Director of Chagnian and the Fraternity. 84. Friend of Fire, Miraculous Survival of Our Son. 85. Betrayal and Fraternity. 86. Scandal in Freemasonry. 87. Open Letter to My Brothers of the Masonic Community. 88. Back Home. 90. 91. School Without Having to Eat, and My Baker Friend. 93. Studying the Teachings of Master Estrada and End of the Work at the Quinto Sol. 95. School A More Mature Disciple. 97. The Naric Jungle and the Missionaries Deliria Awakening Energy unto Humanities on One Planet. 100. The Seamstresses Union and the Good Friend of the Freemasons. Looking for a Job. 101. The Seamstresses Union and the Good Friend of the Masons. 104. Playing the Mom. 107. Sparkles of Passion. 109. Astrology Office, A Lost Village, The Road to Toluca, and The Apprentice Announcer Dreamed. Love. 113. Americo Living Trail. 6. The Vision of an Apostolic Succession, and My Departure from the GFU. 122. You're Still Brother. A New Path and Reverential Mission. 127. Farewell to the Woman of Fire. 131. Professor of Initiatic Astrology. 133. Second Part. 139. Withdrawal, Freeing Myself from the Lunar Network. The Chosen One. 144. The Vision of the Desert and the Black Ascended. 160. From Victoria to Jose Marti. 162. True Sexuality. 167. Wedding in the Presence of the Sat Gurus of the Era. 168. Towards the Americas. 169. Teotihuacan and the Rescue of the Children. 170. Visiting Zalapa and Cotepec. 178. A Bigger Apartment. 180. Towards Los Alamos. 190. Female Incognito. 194. In the Alamos. 196. Colony, The Consecration of the 33 Years. 199. In the Valley. 203. The House of Test. 206. Test. 208. A Couple of Happy Initiates. 214. Leaving Test. 224. The New Apartment and a Life of High Initiative. 226. The Illumination. 235. End of Retreat. 242. Third part 248 Back to the World. Americo Living Trail 7. Introduction Renaissance 250. Visiting another illuminated one 260. First Contacts 261 Maestro Marcelli's Farewell 266 Beloved Master Jose Marcelli, Letter 267 Sexuality and the Life of the Enlightened 271 Pilot Group, and Love 272 My Future Wife ASRHAMDE Hidalgo and Mystical Weddings 276 Wedding 283 Honeymoon 285 The Energy of the Pyramid of the Sun After My Retreat 287 Strengthening Pilot Group 289 The Couple 292 The Teacher's Vows and the Purchase of a Computer 294 White Magic 29 March 21st, 1998 AT The Hidalgo ASRHAM 298 Christ Enters My World 300 The Birth of the Christian Line 303 The Order of the Minor Brothers 318 Secret Chamber 321 Circular 15 324 Filed on July 14, 1999 Fragments Come and See. The Endocrine Glands of Planet Earth People Wake Up. The Sign of the Son of Man in the Heavens 334 Conclusions 339 Part 4 343 The Sign of the Son of Man The Pilgrimages The Sign of the Son of Man Introduction First Pilgrimage 346 Americo Living Trail 8 Potrero Tlatlilcalo Zacalo June 22, 1999 Summer Solstice Background Plaza of the Three Cultures Tlatelolco The Zalo was the Old Tenochtitlan 347 Constitution Square Pre-Hispanic Era 348 The Main Temple of Tenochtitlan 349 Pilgrimage The Village Tepeac-Zacalo 350 June 22, 1999 Summer Solstice By way of prologue Female Mystery 1 Poems Unknown Time Dream Reality Time of Existence Lie Destination Roses NU 352 2 Vive Dreams Large Diamond The Table of Wisdom and Violet Substance The Diamond in the Heart of the Ixtlazihuatl 353 The World is Reborn as a Baby The Magic Town The Center of the Galaxy and Master Baltazar 354 My Master Arabindo 3 times I dreamed of Enoch Hirohito 3 The Town of Glory and My Childhood 355 Town of LA Gloria Notes on My Childhood My Friend from High School 356 The Tarot Reader and My Future Husband Chronicle of the Pilgrimage The Villa Zocalo 358 Americo Living Trail 9 Second Pilgrimage 367 Zimbabwe Saturday, July 17, 1999 Background to Zimbabwe Saturday the 17th of July 1999 368 Third Pilgrimage 376 Teotihuacan July 22, 1999 Background Comment 384 Towards Teotihuacan July 22, 1999 389 Chronicle Attests Very early morning, I've just finished doing my Hatha Yoga postures. Fourth Pilgrimage 400 Oaxaca and Monte Alban Saturday 24 and Sunday the 25th of July 1999 Fifth Pilgrimage 411 from Chapultepec Forest to the Zocalo July 28, 1999 Background From the Forest to the Solo July 28, 1999 413 Chronicle Minutes before leaving for Chapultepec Park, to begin the honoring of Sister Angelica. Introduction to Knowledge of Mexican Culture 417 The Sunstone 418 5 Suns 52-year cycles 419 The Tiger Sun The Son of Air The Son of Rain 420 The Son of Water The Fifth Sun Americo Living Trail 10 Wheel of Days, in the Sunstone Mexican Culture and its relationship with the stars 421 Nanahuatzin and Tecucisticatl Astros 422 Venus and Mercury The Moon 423 Sultana 424 Creator Gods 425 Diversity of Deities Celestial Strata 426 The Holders of Heaven The Night, the Underworld and the Interior of the Earth 427 Butterfly, Sooty Sun Eagle and Butterfly 428 Hearts and Blood, Sacred Food Quetzalcoatl the Feathered Serpent 429 Quetzalcoatl Living Path 430 Zolotl and Quetzalcoatl Sixth Pilgrimage 441 Tajin August 1, 1999 Background before the trip 442 Towards Tajin Chronicle of the Journey 443 Sunday, August 1, 1999 Seventh Pilgrimage 445 Yucatan Friday, August 6, 1999 Background towards Radha, Chronicle of the trip towards UXMAL 447 to Chichen Itza 450, Visit to Zabil-Chaltén 457 to Puerto Progreso 458, Americo Living Trail 11 towards the center of Merida 461, from Merida to Mexico City 465, A New Panorama 468, Fifth Part 470, Merkaba and the Era of Peace Introduction to La Hidalgo and Prelude to a New Stage Dream of the Promoted Moria and Visit to Tula 471 Political Parties and Fanaticism, The Mysterious Old Man and the Confusion of the Sister of the Order Concepts of Transformative Economy 474, 0 as a number for counting the centuries 475 Circular 18 and Gandhi of the New Age Group Visit to the ASRHAM of Cuautla Morales 478, Message on Television 480, T. Long Strike at the University, UNAM, and its Deep Motives Draft Circular 21 and the End of the UNAM Strike 485, from Circular 21 to 22, 486, Circular 22, 487 towards the center, the last phase of the Sign of the Son of Man, August 1999, March 2000, towards Jalapa, towards Zimpizahua 489, towards the ASRHAM of Cotepec 490, back to Zimpizahua 495, Americo Living Trail 12, towards Zico, back to Jalapa 497, Remembrances of the late 2000s and the beginning of the millennium 500, Friday, September 1st, 1999 Friday, September 3rd, 1999 Wednesday, September 8th, 1999 501 Monday, January 10th, 2000, in Zitucuaro Tuesday, March 14th. 2000, just before going to Zimpizahua, where Master Estrada held his retreat, Tuesday, April 18, 2000, March 20th through 21st, 502 Monday, May 21st, 2001. I definitely met some very special women, those in the prime of life, Monday, July 30th, 2001, the July 28th event Tuesday, August 28th, 2001, Dream, Gabriel and the Young Christ 503 Monday, September 13th. 2001, When the One We Love the Most Dies Perfect Wife 504 Thursday, October 11th, 2001, Dream, The Risen Father Friday, October 2nd, 2001, The New Mr. Dela Ferrier Monday, January 20th, 2002. January 18th. Emilco, Querétaro 505 Monday, January 20th, 2002, Guardians of the Master. Be a Witness, January 19th, Galleries Plaza. Maya Mother of Gautama Buddha 506 Final Phase of the Advanced Merkaba 507 Course Monday, July 23, 2002, the Om External Ashram will be inaugurated on Sunday, July 21st. Sunday, September 8, 2002, my brother disciple delivers a draft of the work Living Path to Solar Editors. Orientation Logs 0 Orientation Log Introduction and Review of the environment in which the orientation logs are developed. Women and Power 508 Protection Ceremony 509 The Removal of the Old Man Who Dominated Tibet 510 May 1, 2000. Visit to the Pyramid of the Sun 511 Americo Living Trail 13 Mission accomplished 512 The Channels Ring with UFOs 513 Temascal Inauguration of the First Dome Center and Contact with the Order of Melchizedek Note added by the author Indiana 2010 516 0 Orientation Log continues, 517 Meeting with the group, The Flower of Life Sunday, November 5, 2000, 522 Flower of Life with 24 attendees Saturday and Sunday, December 2nd and 3, 2000 Long-form workshop, The Flower of Life last week of the year 2000 Taken from version, first time format Dream, The Living Ray 531 Creation of our Metatron and Creation of the Antakarana Bridge, Chiopstia de Huacanacatepec in the Pyramid of the Sun, May 1, 2001, 532. Visit to Chile Hidalgo on the autumn equinox of 2001, 534. Between the pause of the SPHINX the Great Alignment 535. Ascension of the Planet September 2008 536. Americo Living Trail 14. First Secret Chamber of America, founded on the autumn equinox in 2010. Introductory note, August 6, 2017. Crosses, Chambers and Universal Ceremony, by Americo. 538. Universal Initiatic Schools Master America Apostolic Succession, by Americo. Answers given by Americo himself, but in an impersonal tone. 539. The Real Estrada, by Americo. 541. Explanatory conclusion. Important aspects of visiting Tijuana, by Americo. 542. Apostolate in the Age of Aquarius 545. Final conclusions 561. Americo Living Trail 15. Presentation Our American, by Pedro Lopez Solis. There are times in life when one is forced to make radical decisions, whether for the better or for the worse, but in the end, they end up being the most important thing for oneself. Much has been said about all this, but it's not, until you experience firsthand what it represents. Americo, the maestro, is a living example of a whole series of changes that have marked him for the rest of his days on earth, and surely beyond it. However, every experience of that nature has given him strength and a degree of maturity in each and every sense, the result of which is what he now represents in the eyes of the world, that is, he is seen as one of the spiritual leaders of recent times by a large part of society in search of the Supreme Being, the other inner self, and even the sublime, that every human being can achieve. This great facet of the Maestro Americo, seen in the flesh, with all his flaws and virtues, are also the achievements in which we can read and see him with our feet firmly on the ground, the same person who loved, loves, and will continue to love forever. The same Americo who also cries and laughs. That's him in yet another of his books, with the added benefit that this one is autobiographical. In it, one can follow the paths trodden by this man who moved through all the currents and doctrines of advanced thought, leaving behind a school and disciples like children scattered everywhere his teachings and words reached, generating the critical conscience. What is told and collected in hundreds of pages printed with ink that is not wasted, upsets the emotions of every reader, so much so that after reading, one knows who this teacher is, who from a very young age had already had his luck assured, since he was born under a lucky star during the age of Aquarius. Americo Living Trail 16. Summary of La Carta in Verdad Media regarding the Big Brother television program, which is popular in various countries around the world. Cultural correspondent present to whom it may concern. Subject, Big Brother. My name is Americo, known in cultural circles for esoteric and initiatory themes. La initiación is the practical application of methods and ways of life to sublimate our passions, and spiritualize them without losing their practical nature. Seeking balance between the transcendent and immanent aspects of our own humanity. The purpose of this letter is to share with you my experiences, which go beyond what the program called Big Brother currently offers. We know that in this televised program, so popular in various countries around the world, people are isolated for 120 days in order for them to present a show, and at the same time, emerge victorious in the challenge of remaining incommunicado during this time, causing an inner sensitization and an awakening of consciousness such as no cutting-edge psychology of the present time would be capable of achieving. They write. In my book, Living Path, I attest that I have remained in natural retreat for 40 months, obeying a sacred initiatic tradition. This falls outside the realm of common modern psychology. But it could be questioned from a theoscientific perspective. I'm making this information available to you, because it is a time when it may attract the attention of many people due to the imminent global change in which we find ourselves. La humanidad. It is natural that, if a person comes forward who has lived this experience not only for 120 days, but for more than 3 continuous years, and who, in addition, comes to bring the la realización sexual, mental and emotional issue under control, the case will attract attention, and, above all, will stimulate consciences to find self-realization in this sense. This would be excellent for the Big Brother phenomenon and the openness of the critics and thinkers who collaborate with this communication enterprise. Don't you think so? I think so. Above all, for this practice to spread to all mystical centers and become a miracle living trail. 17. Popular, generating a way of life in the human way of life that, without withdrawing, enters into seclusion. In order to achieve an exquisite and refined way of life in every sense. I look forward to your assessment of this case, so that we can help guide people's consciences to give a more universal value to Big Brother. Indeed, the Big Brother show is nothing new. In fact, it has been around since ancient times, and even in ancient Europe, it shaped monastic life within convents in this way. What I mean, is that Big Brother is the way of life of a 21st century liberal mysticism, in order to achieve an awakening of consciousness as a method of existence. It's not just an innocent mystical awareness that ultimately attempts to distance us from modern life. On the contrary, it allows us to break the chains of an inert life, so that we can take control of all the good that high technology offers us, while continuing to grow internally. Nothing more for the moment, and taking into account your valuable comments. Sincerely, American. Introduction. Americo Living Trail. 18. Out of respect for the internal and external facts of a historical or personal event, it is necessary to describe them as accurately as possible within the realm of decorum and common sense. This doesn't mean that the people and situations mentioned won't improve. They probably will. So I apologize in advance to those who have already changed, so that they may not identify with the description of them in this autobiography. On the other hand, a book in itself has no power, it's simply a mechanical set of letters on paper. It requires the author and those who manage to assimilate it to make sense of it. I believe that's why work is written. The ideal is for the master to be the instructor of the teaching, and for the student to carry it out, so that it becomes a living teaching. Otherwise, the instruction is incomplete. We often demand that a book be radiant, magnificent, written by someone important, in our view. But even if a true genius writes a work, that doesn't guarantee that we'll be able to grasp it. How many times have we read a good work mechanically, and upon finishing it, our first attitude is to consider it unnecessary to practice it, study it deeply, much less serve that work, until it is fully realized. But with the passage of time, perhaps we come to meditate on it more deeply, and then make that work our Bible. When someone truly recognizes the Master, what is desired, is that many more will find him, and surrender to him, to the author's work. A book is worthless without its realization from being to being. Sentences are an illusion without identification. And if words are not assimilated by their wisdom, then let it be by their passion and the truth of integral being, beyond the mirages of the world. Prologue. Americo Living Trail. 19. August 2017. This work deals with the encounter with light in a very particular way, mainly because it refers to the entrance of the age of Aquarius and all the implications this can have for those familiar with the subject. It's true that every human being finds the light on their path according to their nature. Some because they are religious and respond to the precepts with which they were raised. Others because they are atheists, and operate within the materialistic system, recognizing the creation of a philosophy of life, their professional development, or their spiritual and material achievements as a royal road. They develop a spirituality based on art, philosophy, and, ultimately, their way of applying themselves to existence. All of which is respectable. There are others who venture into what is currently known as metaphysics, which refers to the search for an awakening of consciousness. There are many branches of this, such as occultism, magic, divination, spiritism, spiritualism, esotericism, Freemasonry, and so on. All of which lead to an awakening and development of consciousness. And if not, we only talk about Western religions, and begin to look within wisdom traditions such as Mesoamerica, Hinduism, Egyptology, etc. We are discovering that, in truth, we have no clear idea of the origin of humanity, what we are made of, or what we are for, and where we are going. We even argue about whether reincarnation is real or false. And in my personal case, in addition to the way I grew through these investigations and the conviction of how the human world and its culture are made, I describe in my work how I achieved what is called enlightenment, through the opening of the 7th chakra, located at the crown of the head. And that's why I'm eager to present a work, so that the process toward that encounter may be known. But if everything were that simple, it would be fine, I think. But it isn't. There's more to it. First, because the phenomenon called enlightenment, through this awakening, is already little known in the West. Although it is known that such mystical and mysterious figures, if they exist at all, generally retreat to icy mountains like the Andes, the Himalayas, and other remote regions. Because it's very rare for someone to stay and talk about their experience in detail, as if it were a natural, everyday occurrence. This is why I am aware that, if that were to happen, and it actually happened to me, we would be even less able to easily understand it. This is due above all to the very nature of human history and way of life in general, and especially of the decadent West. However, I'm convinced that the human being is a paradox, because, on the one hand, it is very negative, but on the other, it is positively unpredictable. Thus, within the general decline of the so-called globalized world, there are spiritual imperatives that are relevant to the 21st century and beyond. Therefore, I'm sure that it is a very good thing that I have decided to share my autobiography, to make it public. But I also do it because by doing so I fulfill a sacred commitment. That is, I would like to convey, in the most tangible and simple way possible, the path toward what some philosophers call the state of the Superman or Superwoman. And at the same time, address the issue from a mystical point of view, in congruence with religions and their lofty theologies. To demonstrate that the superior state discovered by philosophy is congruent with what religion calls the state of Buddha, the state of Christ, the state of the Assumption of the Virgin, shamanism, and others. All because, whether from Americo Living Trail 2020, a religious or scientific perspective, humanity is moving toward a golden age, an age of peace. Provided first and foremost, it survives the enormous, highly globalized political, social, moral, and even religious conflicts. And even if it were to achieve this, it would still have much to do to be sure it is capable of preserving a certain universal harmony, enough to say that peace will already be assured. For this reason, I don't expect anything per se with my work, although in my heart I expect a lot from humanity as a whole. So my idea is simply to make it known that someone is saying that it's possible to go from being a person to becoming an energy, without ceasing to have a concrete body. But I know that the controversy surrounding how God and humanity are perceived cannot be resolved, even if a brilliant book were written. I'm aware of that. Although I must be honest, in the course of my autobiography, when, during my exposition, I have had to confess great truths, because I have experienced them firsthand. For example, being myself a direct successor of the messiahs of the age of Aquarius, discovering that I'm part of an apostolic line for this nascent age called Aquarius. I can't expand on this topic at length, as this is only the prologue to my work. But I must say, first of all, that the ascended host or white brotherhood exists, living within the planet. Some esotericists and mystics are aware of this, but not so many religious figures, bound by their overly strict dogmas. And secondly, they, as they do at the beginning of every age, once again in the 20th century, send the avatar or messiah of Earth. This is something I don't have much opportunity to address within the already voluminous work I have written. Namely, each era, both from the point of view of astronomy and astrology, considered a sacred or esoteric science, lasts approximately 2,000 years, more or less. And special envoys are always prepared. In the case of the Sage of Aquarius, the envoys were two avatars or messiahs, Master Serge Renaud de la Ferrière and José Manuel Estrada Vázquez. The first is the celestial avatar and the second, the terrestrial avatar. And the master of both is the master, the Tibetan, who assumed this name to avoid having to give his more well-known name, which is Duajkul. These three masters are recognized as Satgurus or royal gurus, within the most important wisdom traditions. They had the proper permits to appear in America, and particularly in Venezuela, and there, on March 21, 1948, inaugurate the New Age, in accordance with the celestial avatar. And with this, a series of prophecies specific to the situation are fulfilled. In my life, I was fortunate enough to physically meet Dr. José Manuel Estrada, 1900 to 1982, a native of Venezuela who lived in Mexico. I mentioned this in my work, as well as the intimate relationship I had with him through telepathy and the clairvoyance of the woman who was with me during a 40-month retreat I took, which culminated in the state called enlightenment. The interesting thing is that the avatars of the age gave rise to the Supreme Order of Aquarius and the institution known as the Great Universal Fraternity, called the Ferrier Foundation, and later, the Solar Line, reaching out to the public in various countries around the world, with the proliferation of ashrams, which means, place where a spiritual material master or real initiate lives, with his disciples. Hatha Yoga Institutes, asanas. And also, schools of wisdom called, pre-initiatory, initiatory, and secret chambers. And with all this is how we come into contact with the general public, and with a re-education of humanity, in particular. Americo Living Trail 21. This is how Western and Eastern cultures are intended to unify, bringing Hatha Yoga and vegetarianism from the East, Kabbalah from the Hebrews, vegetarianism from ancestral nutrition, etc. At the same time, all of this is consistent with the so-called exact sciences, philosophy, art, and, ultimately, Western culture. All of which had a strong influence on my intellectual and mystical development. In my autobiography, I recount, as I've said, how they, the avatars, contacted me on the inner plane. I also describe what, how, and why I made several sacred pilgrimages within the Mexican Republic, primarily to strengthen the Aquarian cross mystically and energetically among humanity. And how I was initiated by Master Drunvalo Melchizedek into the flower of life and Merkaba meditation. For all this, I had and still have a human life as a seeker of truth, but I was also fortunate to be influenced, accompanied, inspired, and supported not only by invaluable friends, but above all by certain women who were instrumental in my path, or living path, as I call it. One of them was within the Great Universal Fraternity Institution, the acupuncture doctor, another was at my retreat, the Tibetan soulmate, and finally, the one I recognized as my soulmate, and with whom I legally and mystically married. Can human life be combined with mysticism? I believe that, although many are lost in the attempt, it is possible to achieve it, especially if one is marked for it, or is humble enough to experience it at a level without unnecessary ostentation or danger. In my opinion, the living path is possible for the few, and for the many at the same time. And that is the main reason why I share this autobiography. Part 1. Americo Living Trail 22. Birth and Preparation. Prologue. A person's story is interesting, and at the same time not indispensable, because life takes place in its diversity. In reality, it's not easy for anyone to write about themselves, because every life is unique and private, whether it's a good or bad person. For my part, I have no personal interest in sharing my experiences, because my true desire is to remain in eternal contemplation, because after everything I've experienced, the desire to write or read is no longer essential to my existence. Perhaps that's why I must share everything that has led me to be who I am. Only one reason moves me to write about the most important moments of my life, the immense love I have for humanity, sharing everything with them shoulder to shoulder, passion and love, weakness and courage, ignorance, and wisdom. It is because of this same impulse of love for humanity, that it is worthwhile to approach a confidence, when the person offering it to us does so with their heart. Furthermore, there are higher inspirations, that move me to write directly about my life. The main reason is, that I have gone through special experiences related to a sacred initiatory tradition, by virtue of which it is essential for me to bear witness to a living path. Our lives as people don't matter as much as we might think, and likewise, it doesn't really matter much, whether those reading this believe it or not. Magic can only happen when those who dare to do so are willing to search deep within their own souls, and do so with impartiality. I speak on behalf of this, my life, which, for reasons of having achieved congruence between my free will and the higher destiny, has made my autobiography a personal impersonal story. A life subject to a sacred initiatory tradition. What is a sacred initiatory tradition? It is a great council of masters who have achieved self-improvement to the point of becoming immortal. This story is an approach to understanding such masters of wisdom. beings so elevated that we can only call them superhumans, whose experience takes place in a dimension of eternal present, which is why their lives are no longer written in human words, because the words of today's common everyday languages tend to remain superficial enough to comprehend the multidimensional reality of such beings. So, if I can still write something, I do so with all love, and because it is part of my mission. Americo Living Trail 23. Perhaps the scientific mathesis, living synthesis is worth making available to those who desire it. Because there is always the possibility that some, or many, will thank life for the good fortune of entering into a new birth, as happened to me. So be it, are my best wishes. Birth and childhood. I was born in Ciudad Nezahualcóyotl, state of Mexico, in the Raúl Romero neighborhood. I was welcomed by nuns, as this hospital is staffed by nun nurses who belong to the Catholic Church. My mother delivered me painlessly, and I emerged quickly from her womb. I was the firstborn, although my older sister was born before me, and my parents welcomed me with joy. I knew poverty from a young age. My childhood was very short and intense. In fact, my mother herself doesn't fully understand why she went to the nuns' hospital in Nezahualcóyotl for my birth, perhaps because my maternal grandmother's house was close by. My grandmother actually lived a few blocks from this nuns' hospital, in the Mexico neighborhood, on Ángel del Campo Street. Ever since I understood it, I've always been struck by the fact that the name Nezahualcóyotl has to do with the key Netza, which, for those familiar with Kabbalah, refers to the seventh Sephirot of the Kabbalistic tree and means love. Furthermore, Mexico has a lot to do with my life, since, to begin with, this was the name of the neighborhood where I spent the end of my childhood and adolescence. The R in Raúl Romero also stands out in my life due to its relationship with my surname and first name, Raphael. And Ra is the name of the sun god in La Tradición Egyptian. I also can't help but remember that the first part of my childhood, and the place where I worked with my father practically until his death, was the working-class neighborhood, very close to downtown Mexico City. I've always felt a close connection to the workers, and have experienced first-hand manual labor, whether heavy or not, as a laborer. But I want to pause for a moment, to briefly summarize my childhood, with the main goal of establishing how outstanding events in my life, in the hands of my father, gave me strength through difficult experiences, for my age. My childhood was tough in the sense that my father told me I should behave like a man, and not like a lady, but the bad thing about it, as I said, is that I was barely a little boy. So from a very young age, I experienced certain events that marked my life and that, of course, taught me to overcome my fears and discipline myself physically and mentally. For example, once, when I was 5, Americo Living Trail 24 years old, he wanted me to do, even if only for one occasion, my mother's chore, which consisted of going to buy milk at the government-run grocery store called Conasupo in the middle of the night. Around 5 in the morning, when it was still dark. When I went out to do my homework, the street seemed horrible, and the dogs were barking. But I managed to walk through the darkness, crossing the street at the corner, where cars were already passing at a certain speed. I arrived where people were lining up to get their liters of milk. And then I returned with my little bag, which was heavy. I was still a little scared, but as soon as I entered, I noticed my father was worried, and my mother didn't hide her distress. However, their expressions quickly changed, and suddenly they began to applaud me. Also, at that age, my cousins and I used to play outside my father's workshop. My aunt, older than my father, also had a larger workshop, but for repairing car clutches and brakes. And since my cousins were about my age, and it was convenient for us to amuse ourselves, we were allowed to do so on the wide sidewalk. Once, like many other times, we were playing racing to the corner, and back to the workshop. I was running with all my strength, but my mouth was open and I tripped. I fell, scraping my tongue on the pavement. The pain was so intense, that for a moment I thought I would faint. Fortunately, it was only a severe wound in the middle of my tongue. I must have been about 5 years old. No one heard my scream when I fell, because my cousins passed me, and reached the finish line. But a few minutes later, I caught up with them, and they saw me crying, my tongue swollen and bleeding. I feared the scolding from my father, who was drinking a beer, and minding his own business. So I remained silent, while I swallowed my blood. My cousins, almost my age, became concerned and wanted to help by buying me 2 balls of sweet gum, purchased from the store next door by Don Peep, for me to chew. And yes, that stopped the bleeding. When I got home, my mother saw me, and had a heated argument with my father for neglecting me so much. As for me, I later looked in the mirror, and could see the large scar in the center of my tongue, which will remain there forever. I remember being about 5 years old, when I wanted to go with my father, who was going to install a chimney in a factory near our house, which was then located in the working-class neighborhood, in the central area of Mexico City. Since my father needed help, he asked the neighbor to allow her young son, about 10 years old, to accompany him as well. Then, for some reason, my father ordered the boy and me to climb to the top of the gable roof of a small room, to a height of about 3 meters above the ground. We did, but the roof collapsed and we fell. The worst part was that the young man fell on top of me. I was in intense pain, and my father, scared, came running to see what had happened to us. But once the intense pain passed, and my father's conviction that I had to overcome the pain was what calmed me down. He examined me, and fortunately, I was unharmed. Nothing happened to me, despite the fact that it was a very serious accident for a boy my age. On another occasion, I was sent to get a soda, and I was carrying a glass bottle, but I was playing around going down the wide iron stairs at my paternal grandmother's house, where we lived. That's when I tripped, smashing the container on the floor, and a thick piece of glass from the bottle hit me square in the face. I started bleeding profusely, until my entire face was covered in blood. My mother was afraid I had cut my eye. So she called my father at work, about 5 blocks from our house, Americo Living Trail 25, and they both took me to the pharmacy on the corner. The doctor cleaned my face, and it turned out I only had a cut on my eyebrow. It was deep, but fortunately nothing happened to my eyes. All that remained was a small scar that gradually faded. Also once, when I was about 7 years old, I was obsessed, in my father's workshop, with being able to insert a rivet with the pliers called riveters. These rivets are used to join one galvanized, or black sheet to another. All after making a small hole in them with a drill bit. Then, the rivet is placed in the riveter and immediately, the pliers are squeezed tightly with your hands, until the rivet does its joining function. But since I couldn't even reach to open the riveter with my small hands, I used a solid support at the bottom of the pliers as leverage. But the first time, in my desire to get my way, I leaned on it with all my strength and succeeded. However, part of the flesh of one of my palms suffered a tremendous bruise, so much so that ground and coagulated blood flowed from it. It was excruciating pain. Although out of fear of my father I controlled myself as best I could. I was probably 4 or 5 years old, and he was already giving me directions to the garage. Naturally, I couldn't even reach the truck bell with my hand, so I asked someone to do it for me. Those were also the days when he would send me to the pawn shop to renew some ticket. But what's harder to forget was when he sent me to get a welding machine that weighed almost my own weight. It was a device made of copper wire, called a welding machine. That day, I left the workshop on Torquemada Street, and crossed the avenue then known as Lost Boy, which could be seen from my father's small workshop, and he made me board the bus, telling the driver where I should get off. I arrived with a certain unkind engineer, who handed me the welding machine, and was kind enough to help me load the welding machine onto the bus, and back to the workshop. I arrived, and some kind soul helped me unload this heavy device. I remember well that day, my uncle, my father's brother, was at the workshop, when I ran across Lost Boy Avenue to let him know that the welding machine was on the corner, and that my father should go get it. My uncle was amazed at my father's audacity, in sending such a young child to do an adult's job. I was that age, when I was walking with my father down the street toward our house, and suddenly he'd stop in front of the bar, 2 blocks from our arrival, and emphatically order me to wait for him outside. Of course, my father wasn't a drunk, but like his kind, he liked to relax. So, since he told me not to move from where he'd dropped me off, I'd stay there for an hour or 2. But it seemed so long, that I began to think that maybe my father had forgotten, and had already left the place without me noticing. So that kept me on my toes all that time. But all this was a strange contrast between good and bad. and that also happened with regard to food. Because it became common for him to sometimes feed me abundantly, but other times, keep me without food until late in the afternoon or at night. That's why it happened, when I was in high school, around 12 or 13 years old, and I was taking the workshop class on metal structures. It turned out I was the best student, and I simply presented my work made of black, or galvanized sheet metal. I could easily assemble a metal artifact, joining the parts of those pieces with that machine that glues one sheet to another, using two arms ending in copper tips that, upon contact, melt both materials. It's called a punch machine. It's controlled by a foot pedal. That's how I built my first rack, to store notions of goods, in the form of a little house. Americo Living Trail 26 made of sheet metal. Other times, it involved small cabinets or brackets made with angles and iron frames, welded together, etc. The high school teacher was already a bit older, and had a kind heart. But he was so pleased with my work and initiative, that he exempted me from the class, and used me as an example in the class. Then, he'd let me go and play soccer with my classmates. I remember being around 10 or 12 years old. Once every 2 weeks or once a week, my father would send me to buy one or more sheets of sheet metal measuring about 1 meter wide by 2.5 meters long at the hardware store on Zaragoza Road, which required boarding a truck. Once at the hardware store, the employee would make a taco bulkhead, and tie it tightly with wire, so it wouldn't unravel. Then, I would throw it over my shoulder, until I reached the bus stop at the corner of said road and flag down the passenger truck, always hoping it would accept me, so I could board with my precious cargo. If that happened, I would hoist my dangerously sharp sheet metal as best I could up the road. Once I reached my destination, about 5 kilometers away, I would do another job of carefully unloading it. Once, a careless passenger cut his palm on the blade, and it started bleeding, but out of shame, I think, he held it in, and hit his hand, which was dripping a little blood. I was really worried about that incident, but there was nothing I could do. I just took more care from then on to make sure people didn't lean on this dangerous material. When I was about 12 years old, my father had gone out all day, and I was left, as usual, in charge of his established workshop for that season on Zaragoza Street, and almost at 4th St. Pointe. It was then that a man appeared and tricked me into believing that, if I painted him a sheet metal painting with the number, using the enamel paint I was using for some reason, he would pay me a good price. But while I was enthusiastically painting the number, which the man, he told me, would put up outside his house, abusing the trust he had gained in me. Immediately, as if by chance, he asked me for a tool, and I never heard from him again. My father listened, when I told him everything, and this time he was very understanding. Another day, we built a kiln for vulcanizing balata, an urgent request. So we stayed to work all night. In the morning, the client loaded the kiln into his truck, and, for good reason, told my father to allow me to go with him, so I could send him the money for the device, encouraging him to trust me. My father agreed, but a few blocks away, using false arguments, he made me get out of the vehicle, and we never heard from him again. Later, during another period, that lasted about 3 years, my father came up with the idea, that we should transport in artifacts called bells for lunch from the workshop located in the Abrera neighborhood to the San Juan market in Etzahualcoyotl. But the means of transport we would use, was a pedal tricycle, similar to a bicycle. The journey was about 15 kilometers, amidst the city's typical traffic. At first, he showed us how, and then he sent us off on our own. Fortunately, the journey was less difficult, because one of my brothers almost always accompanied me. And our hearts were happy, when we reached the pedestrian and bicycle path, located in the middle of the enormous Zaragoza Causeway, because it meant we only had about 5 kilometers left to reach our destination. The only difference was, that the next day we had to pedal another 15 kilometers, to return the tricycle to the workshop. By the way, it was one of those times, when I was about 13 or so. My older sister was accompanying me on this odyssey of returning to the garage on my tricycle. We were talking about Americo Living Trail 27 boyfriends, and she wanted to hear about how daring I was with women. I made up a story about my girlfriend, being the daughter of the doctor who had his clinic right where we were passing. The funny thing is that when she asked me the name of that girl who was now my girlfriend, I told her name was Beatrice. Just like the real name of my future girlfriend, who was with me on my 40-month retreat, and who dedicated herself to healing through acupuncture. But before finishing this mention of my father, I must remember that he was a very young man when I was born. He was about 23 years old, and my mother was about 17. And the family plunged into chaos. With 7 brothers and only 2 sisters, my paternal grandfather lost his father at a young age. He was also my paternal grandfather, who, by the way, had no arm, but still managed to finish his law degree at the UNM. However, unexpectedly, after having fought so hard to finish his degree in those days, he worked in Mexico City selling cardboard scraps. Due to a blow to an internal organ, I think it was his pancreas, he suffered a serious injury and eventually passed away, leaving a large family in the care of his wife, my paternal grandmother, who loved me very much, and liked us to talk about the history of saints like Saint Francis, Saint Martin de Porres, and others, which fascinated me at my tender age of 5. But it was because of my grandfather's death that all my uncles had to go to work, and there was no way for them to pursue higher education. So, from a young age, everyone worked on the streets selling newspapers, chewing gum, and the like, almost uprooted. And my father, who at a very young age suffered an illness that nearly killed him, had to undergo checkups, and have fluid extracted from his spine, so everyone saw him as the weakest. However, and perhaps for that very reason, he decided not to be one. That's why he became an athlete. Encouraged by his older brother, he became a cyclist, and competed in long races that spanned from one state to another. Later, he was an excellent bodybuilder and swimmer, to the point that he was paid to dive into the pool from the 10-meter diving board. This, incidentally, caused him to lose his hearing in one ear one day due to the impact he suffered upon entering the water. But he also tried to be a boxer. And I was going to find out about that when he proposed to teach me to swim in the San Juan pool, when we were already living in Netzahualcoyotl. In this regard, my swimming lessons had already been sporadic, in pools and on excursions he was enthusiastic about, like when we went to Ajusco, located on the outskirts of Mexico City. We hiked in areas known as the First Dynamo, Second Dynamo, Third Dynamo, etc., going deeper and deeper into the mountains with natural waterfalls. My mother wasn't a good athlete, and didn't like walking, so my then young father liked to take me, being the oldest of my siblings. And so it happened, that one day I told him I wanted to really learn to swim, and not just half float. So we chose the appropriate season so as not to interrupt the lessons, and before going to work, we arrived at the San Juan pool, as soon as it opened, at 6 a.m. But the public men's shower was right there, and my father didn't pay to enter the pool, which was more expensive, but only to enter the public restroom. Until one day he had an altercation with the restroom attendant. And I saw how my father stood up to him without any fear, and warned him not to go in, because we'd end up in the pool anyway. The other man yielded with a certain submission and remained silent. My father was still a little agitated, when we were getting ready to go to the pool, in the very cold water at that time of the morning. He noticed me uneasy and said, "Americo Living Trail 28. I had to fight that guy several times in the ring." He was referring to his boxing days, and he could never beat me. He was referring to the man in charge of the men's restroom. That's why he's mad at me. But he can't do anything to us, so let's go swimming. After about 15 days of serious training, I was more or less able to float, and I felt safe, because if I got tired, I could stand up, not on the shore, and nothing would happen. But suddenly, he ordered me. Well, it's time to go to the cool part of the pool. As far as I knew, it was about 3 meters deep. When I was on the edge at that spot, I was afraid to let go despite his scolding. So he just went to the far end of the pool, leaving me alone on the other side. I started thinking, and even though I was scared, I let go and swam toward my dad. When I arrived, he cheered loudly, because I had made it, and he said to me, "You see, you can swim now." Many years later, my children and their cousins told me that at the time I was on my retreat, my father, that is, their grandfather, was also their swimming instructor, when they were young. But he used a more brutal method, since there were about 15 kids between the ages of 4 and 8. And so, when they were near the shallow end of the pool, before they knew it, their grandfather would throw them out, leaving them with no choice but to swim. Finally, I don't want to forget to mention the long runs our father made us do on the Zaragoza Road bike path. It was about 4 kilometers to reach the foot of the hill called El Peñón in the Paraíso neighborhood. But once there, we had to climb the hill to the top where a huge metal cross about 4 meters high stood. It was about 1.5 kilometers of climbing, between twists and turns to ascend. And then, we would descend and walk those 5 kilometers back to our house. Fortunately, back then, there was no problem or danger of being robbed by thugs. But despite all this, my father couldn't afford to buy us a juice box or at least allow us to carry some water for the journey. For my part, I didn't dare contradict him, despite the silliness of these extremes. These runs, combined with long walks, lasted several years, and we did them at least once a month. All of this is instructive for learning from life. In my case, it was somewhat brutal, but certainly effective. I was almost 7 years old, when my dad was walking drunk in the middle of the night with some siblings and friends. They were coming from a bar, and he had the misfortune of crossing the street without looking, and was hit by a car. He ended up in the Red Cross hospital. His tibia, and, I think, his fibula were broken. They didn't operate properly, and as a result, one leg is slightly shorter than the other. But now that I think about it, I think all of that happened for a reason. I mean, I wonder what would have happened to my father, if he had been healthy and sexually temperamental back then. Well, I later learned that, according to his horoscope birth chart, he had Venus in Scorpio. Americo Living Trail 29. I believe things happen for a reason, and God knows what he's doing. The truth is, that my father took refuge in drink without actually being a hardened alcoholic. And he continued to suffer from gastric and leg problems, which periodically forced him to go to the hospital, although he didn't like it at all. The gastric problems were due to the fact that for years he had inhaled toxic gases released when he welded, did blacksmithing, or did metalwork, which caused ulcers to form in his esophagus. And when these ruptured, he vomited blood. It was then that it would surprise us all, and we had to take him to the hospital to have those wounds cauterized. When we went to live in Netzahualcoyotl, I was about 9 years old, and right at the entrance, my grandmother had rented that part of the place where we lived to a cousin, so he could set up a metal and iron foundry. So, at the entrance, my distant uncle worked, melting metal pieces like aluminum or brass, or cast iron, in a furnace built underground, with the lid level with the ground and a hole in the center that shed light. Inside, a crucible containing metals was carefully placed, which at very high temperatures began to melt, until they became a hot liquid. Except this furnace was quite noisy, and it was lit with oil stirred inside, with air from a motor, installed on the side, to do